Brothers and sisters, friends and family, all you citizens of the world, welcome to the Live from the Heartland show. I'm Michael James here in Chicago in the 49th Ward, and we've got two really good guests coming up, particularly for you people who are following politics. We have the 4th Congressional District Congressman Chuy García coming on, and we're going to have Don Rose, who's been around a long time, seen a lot of things, and going to share some of his thoughts about what's going on. Usually I talk about what's going on in the world and some good things and bad things. I'm just going to talk about, there's plenty of bad things out there, but one good thing. I was driving home last Friday from an activity I was involved with, and I was listening to NPR, and I heard a wonderful interview with Joe Selvin, who worked with Chris Strachwitz of Our Holy Records. And he talked about Chris, he talked about him at length. He talked about a new book out, which is really nice. It's called Our Holy Down Home Music, the stories and photographs of Chris Strachwitz. And one of the things that really caught my attention in the interview was him saying that Chris didn't really care about taking good photographs. He was just looking for album covers and a picture of people. So this book is very, very beautiful. There are some wonderful photographs in it. There's a lot of talk about music and musicians. I actually had received from a friend a T-shirt years ago, a T-shirt that said Los Pingüinos del Norte with some anti-Trump slogans on the back. I thought he had made this shirt up. Turns out that Los Pingüinos del Norte is on Our Holy Records and are in the book. So I'm just recommending it if you're looking for some good information and some beautiful pictures. Once again, it's called Our Holy Records, Down Home Music, the stories and photographs of Chris Strachwitz. So I'm going to just leave it there for the introduction to our show. And once again, we have Chuy García coming on and Don Rose will play a few tunes. We do encourage you to do good in the world, and we know you're doing that. And at the end of the show, we'll tell you that again. So we'll be right back with our first guest. I've been looking forward to this interview. It's been a long time since I got to talk to Chuy García. He is the congressman from Illinois 4th Congressional District. He and I have known about each other a long time from our activist days. He was an alderman. He was real involved in helping Harold Washington be elected. He went on to become a state senator, a member of the Cook County Board of Commissioners, and he is the U.S. congressman from the 4th District. And he's a wonderful guy. Good afternoon to you, Chuy.
Thank you so much. Great to join you, Michael. It's been a while. Lots going on in Washington right now, but maybe it won't be much after all. But we'll see. But we are dealing with war and peace and immigration and migrant cities and things that we're experiencing back home that are causing plenty of tensions and challenges for the future, as you know.
Well, we're going to touch on, I guess, all of that stuff. Let's start in the Middle East. A lot of people were pretty shocked by the initial attack on the people of Israel. But I've been saying for weeks now that I think Israel is losing the high ground. We found this week that President Biden actually was critical of Israel, and it's clear there's some differences. A number of people have started to come out for a ceasefire. I believe Jan Schakowsky, a fellow congresswoman from Illinois, as well as Senator Dirksen. And I think you, too. Give us a little hit on what's going on in the Middle East and where you're at on a ceasefire.
Well, the Middle East and the situation between Israel and the Palestinians in the West Bank, and of course, the events of the last 2 months in Gaza, which are heart-wrenching and hard to see continue being in the news for all the bad reason. The situation remains very dire, very urgent. You saw the UN voted by a whopping number calling for a ceasefire. It's the only way forward. And funding for Israel to the level of over $10 billion is a part of this package, which is being debated. That also includes funding for Ukraine, Taiwan, and for the border is a part of this current debate and controversy here in Washington. So it was good, in my opinion, to see President Biden say last night that Israel has engaged in indiscriminate bombing. And obviously the implication is that thousands of lives are being lost, so many of them children, so many others civilians, and it just breaks your heart. I came out calling for, of course, condemning Hamas and calling for a ceasefire. The morning that I learned of this must have been perhaps early October 8th. And I did so just out of an instinct that the current Israeli government, led by Benjamin Netanyahu, is the most reactionary and right-wing government ever in Israel, and how they would respond. And I'm afraid to say that my instinct was right on point, because I think that the needless taking of so many lives does not have to happen, and it needs to stop. We're witnessing a disaster, of course, unfold on top of an existing humanitarian crisis. Gaza was already suffering from a 16-year blockade, with civilians living in conditions that many human rights groups have said is an open-air prison. So now the conditions are far, far worse. UN officials report that Gazan society is teetering on the edge of collapse. The health system, I think, is collapsed already. Doctors are desperate. Other medical personnel and humanitarian aid is sorely lacking. And let's not forget that it is estimated that 85% of the population has been displaced. There are longer term questions like, where will people return to if the bombing stops? Where are the jobs? Where are the apartment buildings? Where are the institutions and the businesses that were there? So I was one of the first members to call for a ceasefire before we knew what would unfold, before it sort of got politicized and polarized. And right now, there are more than 60 members of Congress who have called for a ceasefire. And I hope that that coalition grows. And I hope that President Biden will become one of them, though he's not in Congress. And, we saw the importance of diplomacy and de-escalation with the temporary ceasefire last month, which led to the release of many hostages, including Americans. Israelis deserve to live in safety, so do Palestinians. But there's no military solution to this horrifying situation, and bombs will not bring a durable peace.
Well, we'll probably have to talk about this more in the future because it seems to be going on. It seems like the Netanyahu government, the most conservative, as you point out, is really about destroying Gaza and the West Bank. It's going to be rough, and we'll follow up on that. Let me ask you, there's a lot of talk in Washington over the supplemental. So for those of us in the back room, please tell us what the supplemental actually is and what it's all about, what's going on with you guys over in Congress.
Yes. So a supplemental is a proposal. It turns into a bill specifically, because that's the way we have to enact things in Congress to have the force of law. Right now, it is a proposal that President Biden has made to Congress to provide military assistance and humanitarian assistance to Ukraine, to Israel, to Taiwan, and for the border. It also provides for additional humanitarian assistance to those war zones across the globe, but including Gaza and the West Bank. So It is being debated in Congress. There's controversy because many Republicans want to end the support for Ukraine and think that enough has been done. There is a group of members of Congress who are Putin sympathizers and backers, and I guess they see him as Russia's Donald Trump. I don't know. But there is such a block that is saying we should not provide additional funding. There are Republicans who support aid to Ukraine, and of course, especially more Democrats supporting it. The proposal has been used by the Republican Party to say that it will not pass in the House and it will not pass in the Senate. And the Senate seems to be deferring to the House, at least Senate Republicans, if there aren't border security and other issues included in the bill. This is unusual. It's very rare that a supplemental funding bill is used to enact policy, and very radical policy, I must say, that would dismantle the asylum system, make it much more difficult for people to seek political asylum at the border, force them to apply in safe third countries. There are very few of those in the hemisphere right now, especially in Mexico and Central America or South America as well. And it would also end the President Biden's authority on parole, an authority that's been used to allow people fleeing persecution and violence and many other horrible things to be allowed into the country with parole under supervision, so that they can have an opportunity to make their case before immigration officials for asylum and refuge. And what is so striking about this supplemental proposal and the subsequent negotiations is that Republicans in the Senate are sort of leading it, and the Democrats on there include Chris Murphy from Connecticut, but Kristen Sinema, who is not a Democrat anymore. I don't know what she is exactly, but maybe an independent, as she likes to call herself. But the point is this, that the most affected communities, immigrants and Latino communities, are not at the table. There's no consultation going on with the Congressional Hispanic Caucus, 42-member caucus. And our request to meet with the White House, with the president, or with his chief of staff has not been acknowledged. So we are being left out of this process and potentially could serve as the sacrificial lamb as this deal gets cooked up. So it's very troubling, and it got lumped together so that it would be difficult for Congress to reject either separately assistance to Ukraine, though if that came as one separate bill, it would pass. There would be more debate around Israel. And then, of course, there will be much debate about how much more funding we want to provide to militarize the border and to turn people away, essentially enacting Trump-era policies that seek to shut the border down. And that would be very problematic for our country. It would be very problematic for Mexico, would be just unprecedented. And we know one thing, that when people are desperate, they will find a way to come here. So this will not have the effect of just shutting down the border and keeping people from entering into the country. Republicans have weaponized the immigration issue, created hysteria, tropes, and stereotypes, and they're seeking to take advantage of this situation as it relates to Ukraine, Israel, and Taiwan to force border policy, breaking longstanding traditions that you don't do that in a supplemental budget or funding bill.
Chuy Garcia, how big a hit do you think immigration and the border policy will take say a progressive perspective or a hope anyhow. And what ideally would you do to deal with the border situation if you had the ability to enact whatever?
Well, look, adopting the core tenets of Trump's immigration policy won't work.
Right.
And it's simply a political electoral calculation by Republicans, and it's a bad one. So I don't know why a Democratic administration would say, all right, maybe we'll give on what you want to do. It's short-sighted. I think it alienates a significant part of a base that elected the president to office in the first place, and shutting down legal pathways to immigration isn't going to stop people fleeing violence and hunger and other terrible things. Reducing the avenues of legal immigration is what has exploded. The number of people coming here, and also our foreign policy and the sanctions that we have put on Venezuela, Cuba, all of the drug wars and the military assistance that we provided Colombia for such a long time. We have driven people out of their countries. We have displaced them. And now our foreign policy is, at our southern border. And as we see, because of all of its implications in, making people look for a better way to live, they have come north and they are in our cities, as we know.
And they're going to be voters in our cities in a not too far off future. Chuy, in our time remaining, let me ask you, let's bring it home to Chicago. And, I think that the people of Chicago have always welcomed people from other countries who left their countries in a desperate situation. And then we started to see some pushback and kind of a not in my backyard. And I think that there are plenty of people in Chicago who have good reason to be critical of them not getting things they were promised. But it also is a pretty dire situation for people coming to the border. We saw most recently in Brighton Park, a small number of people turning out in probably 58,000 people in that ward. But they got a lot of press, and they were kind of saved when the governor came up with the environmental testing that showed that the site was really not ready to be occupied. So there was a little victory for those people, but and I kind of like that. But what I don't like is the not in my backyard. And then you have aldermen calling for ending the sanctuary cities, which will not affect it. Give us your take on Chicago and how best we might deal with the influx of migrants that are going to continue to come for a little bit of time.
Yeah, let's be clear about some things. This isn't anything new. It happened with the Chinese. The first anti-immigrant legislation in our country in 1882 was the Chinese Exclusion Act. So when I saw Chinese Americans kind of leading the charge against migrants coming to Brighton Park, that was disappointing. That was heartbreaking for this immigrant boy who came from Mexico. But look, it's been done to the Chinese, to the Irish, to Italians, to Mexicans. At least in two instances in the 20th century, during the Great Depression, when people of Mexican American origin, U.S. citizens, were repatriated to Mexico because of how they looked and their names and where they lived, in the Southwest primarily. Again, during the 1950s, Operation Wetback, and all of the implications of that trope and that stereotyping. And now, we're seeing it, a new iteration of these tensions with new immigrants. And we're also seeing misinformation that plays on people's fears. But at the core of that fear is pain and disillusionment with the system and government that has failed them in part. I understand some of the tensions that we've seen in the African American community, in other communities as well. I immigrated to Chicago in 1965, and I grew up, in progressive activism and believing in coalition. And it was, the black, brown, and the rest of the rainbow that shook up Chicago's political system and the status quo. And I was, elected to represent one of the city's first Latino majority wards with Harold Washington. And we fought for reinvestment in the neighborhoods. That was the primary piece in his platform and in priorities when he became mayor. So we made it happen. In 1985, Mayor Washington issued the first executive order declaring Chicago a welcoming sanctuary city because a Puerto Rican woman, a commissioner, Maria Cerda, was interrogated by immigration officials asking her for her papers. A woman, U.S. citizen, born in Puerto Rico, racially profiled, ethnically profiled, and asked for her papers, but it was a reflection of something else that was going on in immigrant communities. So all of these are the stories and the realities of why we have an executive order, why we have a policy now in Chicago, an ordinance that seeks to welcome everyone and to protect people. This is all to say that, all of my years of activism and years in office, all of that is rooted in the notion that the only way to move forward is through coalition and fighting for equity and fighting for racial and economic justice for everyone in our city and to reinvest. So that is, I think, the most important thing. My hope right now, I want you to know that we are fighting, first of all, in the supplemental on the immigration and immigrants front, that we want more resources for sanctuary cities like Chicago, New York, Houston, other cities, because it is having an impact on the city's budgets and it needs to be alleviated. But we're also fighting for funding for organizations that are welcoming and have used up parts of their budgets to do this as well. And we're also trying to include policy, since the president has said, let's consider some Republican policy in the supplemental. We're saying, let's do some legalization for dreamers, for people who have DACA across the country. Republican and Democratic voters support this overwhelmingly. These are young people, for the most part, who have grown up all of their lives in this country. It's the only place they know as home. Let's legalize them. Let's help people who are married to U.S. citizens get their green cards faster. Let's hire more immigration judges so that we can more expeditiously do away with the backlog in consideration of asylum seekers and other immigration-related applications as well. These are all very common sense things that our economy needs, that voters, for the most part, support overwhelmingly. And this can get our immigration system back on track as we do some longer term reforms to ensure that there is fairness in the system, that it addresses not just our economic needs, but also needs for the future. We need more people to care for our children, more people to care for our elderly, for people who are over 65, Michael. And of course, we need them in manufacturing. We need them in technology. We need them in all the sectors. So that should lead to a revision of our immigration laws and a modernization of our immigration laws.
Chuy Garcia, there's a lot of things I'd like to ask you about, but I know you're in the cauldron over there and you got to run off and do what you got to do, and we're rooting for you.
Let's book another date so we can talk some more, and maybe over the holidays we'll have a chance to do that and see what comes out of the session that's supposed to end this week.
All right, I'll be back in touch with you, Chuy. Thanks a lot.
Okay.
And everybody else,
Take
stay
care.
tuned. We're going to be right back with our next guest. So don't go too far here from that left end of your dial over here. See you next
Thank you.
time. Thank you,
Take
Chuy.
care.
Welcome back to more Live from the Heartland. We're bringing on our second guest, who is no stranger to you regular viewers and listeners. He knows an awful lot about what's going on in the world, pays attention for a long time. The one and only Don Rose. Hello, Don.
How are you? Good to see you once again.
We're good. It's glad having you back. I got your weekly column, and it was headlined something to the effect of "Good news for President Biden, maybe for a change or something." Let's talk about that. What is your premise?
Well, there are two issues on it, slightly different, but amidst all the very, very bad news that he's had about sinking poll numbers and the indictment of his son, and who probably deserves it, but certainly Biden should not be bearing any of that problem, but he probably will. Anyway, the news has generally not been good for our president, and I noticed a couple of things have happened that are a little harbingers of possible. Well, I think they're good news anyway. Whether they turn out to be exactly winning, who can say at this point? The first is that the University of Michigan keeps a poll, a running poll of the public attitude toward inflation and general, which has been in decline for a long time. As you know from the past, even though the actual numbers on inflation are very, very good, it's been declining regularly. The people have not noticed it yet because the main sign of inflation they see are not the big numbers, the gross numbers, but the numbers they're paying at the grocery store and the gasoline pump. Well, the gasoline has come down, and there actually has been a slight down notch in groceries. And the interesting thing is that this number took a 13% jump upward, reversing a long-term downtrend and starting an uptrend. In other words, the general public now seems to be less afraid of inflation and is taking a somewhat more optimistic look. Well, if this continues, that's a great harbinger for the president, who really needs it. Now, to go along with that, Donald Trump, remember him, has come up with an issue he thinks is going to benefit him in his nuttiness, but is going to really help Biden. He has come out once again against Obamacare. As it turns out, you may remember he campaigned against Obamacare in 2016, and his first term he couldn't do anything about it. It was saved narrowly and by McCain in that famous thumbs down motion at one point, and that was a thumbs down to Donald Trump, not to Biden. Anyway, it seems to me, and to a few other people too, that Trump is somewhat obsessed with Obama. He sometimes thinks he's still running against Obama. He's never run against Obama, but he thinks he is. And the fact is that Obamacare is at an all-time high, and it's a bipartisan high, something in the vicinity of 58 to 60% of the people, including all kinds of union workers and blue-collar workers, as well as younger people, are very, very big on Obamacare. And Biden certainly needs something to help with the younger people. And Obamacare is a perfect issue because if you'll recall, some of us don't have to worry about this, but you can stay on your parents' insurance up to age 26. And I'm sure that makes a lot of young people, in their 20s feel pretty good. And the fear of losing it goes along with other people who, feel that they've got a very good thing here, an affordable, wide-ranging insurance policy. And this gives our president another issue with which to slap Trump going along with abortion, and we know abortion is a, excuse me. No, we know abortion is a powerful tool electorally. We've seen, all these red states come out with pro-abortion votes. So we've got kind of a 1-2 punch on abortion and to retain, to expand abortion and to retain Obamacare. And issues that cross over into Republican territory, which is what we really need. And it should revive the younger vote that may be a little, for many reasons, including Israel, are having problems with Joe Biden. So I consider these two things: the acquisition of another major issue to work with, plus the turnaround, and we hope it continues. There are other indications it may continue. The unemployment level is down to a near an all-time minimum of 3.7%. So I would say things are looking up. Certainly, it's not the whole story, and I can't predict a Biden win from this. But these are two strong elements to make us all feel better next November.
Do you think that some of his talk, talking about the bad guy president, some of his talk turns off people, like that stuff about he'd be a dictator for a day, and he just doesn't seem to tone down anything to try to reach a broader audience than his so-called base. And I'm just wondering if does he think the base is big enough to elect him?
Well, we know that the base is not big enough to elect him. It's where they go beyond the base, and I think that may give some people pause. People remember Biden won by 7 million votes, and it looks like he's losing some of those people now. The early polls, but those don't predict anything at all. So I don't want to go discussing all these polls and tell you why not to pay any attention to it. However, Trump's cult is very, very strange. He may lose a few people around the edges. Certainly, if he's convicted of anything before Election Day, which is a big if, he will lose, according to what we can see, he can lose 5 or 6% of his base. But the other things are just fringe. Now, of course, in an election that is decided in 2 or 3 or 4 states, which is really what it is, by something under a total 100,000 votes, that 7 million margin doesn't mean much. It's not a democracy. Remember, we have this electoral college republic, and So we look for anything that shaves something off the edge of what he's got helps us. We don't know yet whether the talk about being dictator only for a day, and then one of the things he can dictate is that he will be a dictator the next day. And so on and so forth. And he can keep declaring everything day one, which is far more likely. But, I've kind of given up figuring out the cult-like nature of his main following. And we look and see how people, even within the Republican Party, there's still not a majority of people altogether going along with his 3 or 4 remaining opponents. He's getting an absolute majority of the votes. You go figure it out. People have a lot of choices there. They may not like Nikki Haley because she seems reasonable and she can talk reasonably on abortion. They don't seem to like Chris Christie, who gives an all-out attack. And some people even like this guy Ramaswamy, maybe because he's probably the only guy running who's more obnoxious than Trump.
Well, Don, one of the things that you didn't talk about in your good news for Biden is the situation in Gaza, in Israel, et cetera, which really, I keep saying this over and over. It seems like, people were really concerned and upset when Hamas attacked Israel, but Israel seemed to have been losing all along the high ground. And I think my sense is it's not just trying to get rid of Hamas. They're really just destroying the Gaza, and probably they'll go maybe the West Bank too. And it seems like there's really no place for people to go home to. And Biden seemed pretty in at the beginning with Israel. He's certainly mitigated his position. He's critical of Israel now. It's clearly there's a split between us and Israel. What's your sense about that and all the talk about young people who have suddenly learned all kind of stuff about Palestine? I mean, everybody knows more and more history about what has gone on in the Middle East. And I'm just wondering what you think the ramifications of that will be. I tend to think we'll come back, some of those people will come back if they only have a choice between Trump and Biden. But your thoughts?
Well, that's my thought too. And, the greatest mistake that Biden made was that awful embrace of Netanyahu. And he's finally realizing, I don't know, I think he began to realize what a mistake it was. And he's now openly challenging Netanyahu on the conduct of the war. And I think if we've got 2 things to deal with here. One is the impact that this may have on our own election, and the other is what is happening in the world. Netanyahu wants to hang on and be as brutal as he can because he thinks that's the only way he's going to save his rear end, because he's got terribly low numbers after people have realized that the intelligence failures and the military failures are his fault, and that he has actually been subsidizing Hamas. He likes having an enemy there. Now that that's come out and Biden is making an open break with him, yes, I think Biden recovers some of those votes that are lost. People, we're losing 2 kinds of people. We're losing I say we and he interchangeably at this point in our society. I've nenever had to identify so strongly, and that's mainly out of fear of the opponent.
Yeah, I hear you.
But I think he's in jeopardy with a lot of Palestinian and other Arab voters who sympathize with the Palestinians. We've seen it. We've seen these open breaks enough to lose in Michigan, and if he loses Michigan, he loses the election. So I think his final pushback may be a saving grace in this regard. I think it's very important, and if he can press and discipline Netanyahu, or help discipline the IDF, the Israeli Defense Forces, he is trying to do. I think he's talking about opening up more paths for aid and so on. So he's trying to claw back from what was an untenable position.
Yeah.
And it looks, he's making the right steps, short of telling Netanyahu to get the hell out of there. But Netanyahu wants to hang on to that right-wing badge. So we have yet to see how it plays out. So on as far as impact here, my judgment is that he will claw back some of those votes, and it depends on what happens, in the next couple of months. Will the IDF, Netanyahu, or those crypto Nazis in Israel? And I support Israel, and I believe Israel has a right to exist. So I'm not one of those. I don't know if we've talked about this before. I think Israel has a right to exist as a Jewish state, so long as we recognize a dozen or more Arab states or Buddhist states, and even some places call themselves Christian states. So if there can be religious-based states, Israel certainly is entitled to its own, even though it's a young one and been there created under unfortunate circumstances in 1948. But to go back to it, much depends on how much this world influence will have on Netanyahu and some of these right wingers whose chants sounded better in the original German. So touchy situation, a very tricky one, and we're dealing with unpredictable figures.
Yeah, it is a rough one. And I do believe that Israel has a right to exist. I know that the Israeli Constitution is really good for all people.
Well, it's unfortunately, they don't really have a constitution, a written constitution. And if they did, they might have not had so many of these troubles. They act as if they've been acting as if they had a constitution, the way Britain, acts as if it has a constitution, even though it does not.
Well, that one's a new on me. I just remember probably talking with our friend Marilyn Katz about Israeli securing the rights or stating the rights of all the people who live within the border. I think the key really is, and where Netanyahu doesn't want, is a Palestinian homeland too. And I don't know how they're going to do that, but that's the only solution, because they're not going to. I don't know how they're going to build on all that rubble.
well, the other thing Netanyahu has to do, or the government, if Netanyahu is prevented by his constituency, his government from stopping it, he must put a halt. They must put a halt to the damage that's being done in the West Bank. These settlers, Israeli settlers in the West Bank, are brutalizing the people who should be built up for the two-state solution.
Yeah, it's a rough one, and we're gonna. I'm sure we'll talk about it again. And I had a bunch of other questions as usual, but we're running out of time, Don. So I want to thank you for coming on. And I don't know how people get your newsletter. If you ever want to share that, you could tell them now. But it's a really worthy piece of writing every week.
Well, thank you. I'll have to do it in advance because it comes out every Monday, so I miss this. But if I have a chance to plug the interview in general, I will do so. I'll put an addendum. I don't like to do a lot of bragging on my on my own column, but it's a pretty damn good column.
No, it is. How do people get it if they don't do? I mean, the only way is if you know your email and they ask.
Yes. Yeah. And anybody who is interested in it can write me. My email is donrose65@AOL.com, DONROSE65@AOL.com. And within a day, you will be put on the list for the Monday column.
Okay, brother. Thanks a lot. And I'll see you soon. We're going to go right to our sign out. I want to encourage people to check out youtube.com/Heartland Media. The last 2 weeks have had some really good interviews if you missed them. 2 weeks ago, we had Floyd Webb on Black Film, and we had James Russell, a longtime SDS activist, and he talked about integrating schools in Oklahoma when he was a young guy involved with CORE. And then we had the incomparable Katie Hogan, who was sometimes on this show talking about walking the Camino over in Spain. She just got back. And we had Warren Lemming, who went into all kind of things, including his band Wilderness Road, his plays, Bertolt Brecht, etc. So I want to thank everybody who helps make the show possible. Our guests, Don Rose and Congressman Chuy Garcia, our engineer, Hal James, our producers, Katie Hogan, Tom Clark, our music producer, Lynn Orman. And once again, I'm encouraging you all to do good in the world. Now is the time to step up. All right, over and out till next week.